Ready today? JustProfessor here. Your brain takes shortcuts on everything. It doesn't analyze carefully. It grabs the fastest answer and moves on. This makes you wrong constantly. But your brain doesn't care, because being fast feels more important than being right. And these mental shortcuts are controlling almost every decision you make without you realizing it. Here's a quick question. A bat and ball cost $1.10 total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Your brain immediately says 10 cents. That's the shortcut answer. It feels right, but it's wrong. The ball costs 5 cents. Your brain took a shortcut that gave a fast wrong answer instead of doing the actual math for the slow right answer. This is shortcut bias. Your brain constantly chooses quick intuitive responses over careful analysis. And this isn't just happening with trick questions. It's happening with real decisions that actually matter in your life. Shortcut bias is when your brain uses mental shortcuts called heuristics to make fast judgments instead of engaging in careful analytical thinking. Your brain has two systems. One that's fast, automatic, and intuitive, and one that's slow, deliberate, and analytical. Shortcut bias means you default to the fast system almost always because it requires less mental energy. You grab the first answer that feels right instead of checking if it's actually right. This happens because thinking is expensive. Your brain uses massive amounts of energy, and careful analytical thinking is especially costly. So your brain evolved to be lazy, to use shortcuts whenever possible, and save the expensive analytical thinking for when absolutely necessary. Most of the time, these shortcuts work okay, but they create systematic errors and biases because the shortcuts prioritize speed over accuracy. The problem is shortcut bias makes you confidently wrong about things you could get right if you slowed down and thought carefully. You make snap judgments that feel certain but are based on shortcuts rather than analysis. You accept information that confirms your shortcuts without questioning it. You defend positions you arrived at through shortcuts as if you reasoned through them carefully. Your brain's preference for fast shortcuts over slow accuracy is making you wrong while feeling right. Let me show you where shortcuts control your thinking. Reading and comprehension show shortcut bias clearly. You're reading this right now using shortcuts. You're not carefully analyzing every word. You're skimming, grabbing the main idea, filling in details automatically. This usually works fine, but sometimes you misunderstand because your shortcut grabbed the wrong meaning. You thought you understood, but you took a mental shortcut that missed important details. First impressions are pure shortcut bias. You meet someone and within seconds you've judged them based on appearance, first words, body language. Your brain took shortcuts to categorize them quickly rather than carefully gathering information. Sometimes these shortcuts are accurate, often they're wrong. But your brain made the snap judgment anyway because shortcuts are fast and thinking is slow. Problem-solving defaults to shortcuts. You encounter a problem, and your brain immediately jumps to a familiar solution, rather than analyzing whether that solution fits this specific situation. This is why people keep using the same approaches that don't work. Their brain shortcuts to familiar patterns instead of thinking carefully about what this particular problem needs. Decision-making is dominated by shortcuts. You're choosing between options, and your brain uses simple rules. Pick the familiar one, pick the one you've heard of, pick the one that sounds good, pick the default. Careful analysis of pros and cons would be better, but that's slow and hard. Shortcuts are fast and easy, so your brain picks shortcuts even when the decision matters. Category and stereotype thinking are shortcuts. Your brain sees someone or something and immediately assigns them to a category based on surface features. Then it applies all its assumptions about that category without checking if they're accurate for this specific case. This shortcut saves time, but creates bias and error. Pattern recognition works through shortcuts. Your brain sees partial information and fills in a complete pattern based on past experience. Sometimes the pattern recognition is accurate. Sometimes your brain is seeing patterns that aren't there or applying the wrong pattern. But the shortcut happens automatically before you can check its accuracy. The emotional reasoning is a shortcut. You feel something, so you assume it's true. If it feels risky, it must be risky. If it feels safe, it must be safe. If someone feels untrustworthy, they must be untrustworthy. Your emotions become shortcuts for judgment instead of actually analyzing the situation. This is faster than thinking, but often wrong. Memory works through shortcuts. You don't carefully recall events. You reconstruct them using shortcuts based on what usually happens and what you expect. Your brain fills gaps with plausible details rather than admitting uncertainty. This makes memory fast but often inaccurate because the shortcuts insert false information. Math and logic fall victim to shortcuts. Given a math problem, your brain tries to pattern match to familiar problems instead of working through the actual logic. This is why people get trick questions wrong. Their shortcuts grab familiar-looking patterns instead of analyzing what the question actually asks. So, how do you overcome shortcut bias? How do you slow down and think carefully instead of always taking the fast wrong path? First, recognize when shortcuts are likely. Complex decisions, important judgments, unfamiliar situations, information that conflicts with your beliefs. These are times when shortcuts will lead you astray. When you catch yourself in these situations, deliberately slow down and engage analytical thinking instead of accepting your first intuitive response. Second, check your confidence. When you feel very certain about something you decided quickly, that's a red flag. Shortcut bias creates false confidence because shortcuts feel right. Real analysis creates appropriate uncertainty. If you're certain but you didn't think carefully, you're probably wrong via shortcuts. Third, force yourself to consider alternatives. Shortcuts lock onto the first answer that seems right. Break this by deliberately generating other possibilities. What else could be true? What am I not considering? Shortcuts hate this because it requires the slow thinking they're designed to avoid. Fourth, make important decisions twice. Decide once using your intuitive shortcuts. Then put it aside and later carefully analyze the same decision from scratch using deliberate thinking. Compare the results. If they match, you can be more confident. If they differ, your shortcuts might be wrong and you need to understand why. Fifth, learn to enjoy the feeling of thinking. Shortcuts dominate partly because careful thinking feels uncomfortable. It's hard, it's slow, it's effortful. But you can learn to find satisfaction in thorough analysis rather than always choosing the easy shortcut path. Value being right over being fast. Sixth, identify your personal shortcut patterns. Everyone has favorite shortcuts they overuse. Maybe you shortcut to assuming people like you. Maybe you shortcut to pessimistic assessments. Maybe you shortcut to familiar solutions. Knowing your patterns helps you catch them happening. Seventh, use external tools to force careful thinking. Checklists, decision frameworks, written analysis. These tools make shortcuts harder and force you into more careful evaluation. Your brain will resist because tools are slower than shortcuts, but tools help you be right instead of just fast. Shortcut bias is making your brain choose fast over right almost every time. You take mental shortcuts that give quick answers instead of engaging careful analysis that gives accurate answers. This happens constantly with reading, decisions, judgments, problem solving, memory, and basically every cognitive task. Your brain prioritizes efficiency over accuracy because thinking is expensive and shortcuts are cheap. This isn't always bad. Shortcuts often work okay, and you can't possibly think carefully about everything. But shortcut bias means you're also taking shortcuts when you shouldn't. On important decisions, complex problems, unfamiliar situations where shortcuts lead to systematic errors. You're confidently wrong about things you could get right if you engaged analytical thinking instead of accepting shortcut answers. Understanding shortcut bias helps you recognize when you're thinking fast versus thinking carefully. It helps you see that quick, confident judgments are often based on shortcuts rather than analysis. It helps you deliberately slow down when accuracy matters more than speed. The next time you have a strong, quick opinion about something, question whether that's based on careful thinking or mental shortcuts. Did you analyze this properly, or did your brain grab the first answer that felt right? That pause to check is how you overcome shortcut bias. By catching yourself taking shortcuts and choosing to think carefully instead. Your brain will always prefer shortcuts because they're easier, but knowing this helps you override the preference when it matters and choose slow, careful, right over, fast, easy, wrong. Subscribe to learn about more cognitive biases making your brain prioritize speed over accuracy.